On the edge of Kazan, behind a row of apartment blocks, there is a supersonic airliner. Not a model, not a mock-up, the Soviet answer to Concorde, parked on the grass since 1985. Across the old Soviet Union, there are dozens of machines like it. One-off giants, built for a country sure of the future. Then that country stopped existing, and they were left where they stood. 9 today. Stay for number 1. A thing near Minsk with 24 wheels, built to haul a nuclear missile. They built 2, and both are sinking into a field. This isn't a story about machines that failed. Most of these worked, and some of them worked brilliantly. It's a story about a country that ran out of money and future at the same moment and left its cleverest ideas standing in the open. We start with the one that was meant to outfly everything. Number 9. The Sukhoi T-4 at Monino, near Moscow. Behind the tidy exhibits of the Air Force Museum, on a stretch of cracked tarmac, sits a long white dagger of an aircraft with a nose that droops like Concorde's. This is the Sukhoi T-4, nicknamed the Sotka, and it first flew on the 22nd of August, 1972. The Soviets built it to answer America's XB-70 Valkyrie, to fly at 3 times the speed of sound and outrun anything sent up after it. At that speed, ordinary aluminium softens, so almost the entire aircraft was welded from titanium and steel. A manufacturing problem so hard that solving it generated close to 600 patents. It also flew the first fully computer-controlled flight control system in the world. It was a genuine leap, and in testing it, reached about 1/3 faster than sound before the program was stopped. Because it was ruinously expensive, and the marshal in charge of defense wanted a cheaper swing-wing bomber and a big order of fighters instead. The story goes that the defense minister, Andrei Grechko, was told he could have his fighters only if the T-4 was cancelled. It was, in 1974. 2 airframes were finished, and a 3rd was on the line, but only the first ever left the ground, and it flew just 10 times for a total of 10 hours in the air. The rest were scrapped where they sat, and the survivor was rolled into the museum and left. The titanium skin has held up better than the paint. Its drooping nose still points down the length of a runway it was never allowed to use. But number 8 is the one you've already seen. It's the airliner from the start of this video. Number 8, the Tupolev Tu-144, which is located at Kazan. On a lawn beside Building 6 of the Aviation Institute stands tail number 77107, A-Tu-144. The machine the West called Concorde and NATO called the Charger. It beat Concorde into the air by 2 months on the last day of 1968, and it was the first airliner in the world to fly faster than sound. On paper, it was a triumph. In practice, it was rushed, unreliable, and briefly deadly. One broke apart in front of the crowds at the Paris Air Show in 1973. And when Aeroflot finally put the type into passenger service, it lasted only months before it was quietly dropped. 16 of them were built, and between them they flew barely 100 commercial flights, only about half of those carrying any passengers at all. The whole program was shut down by government order, and this particular aircraft made its last flight into Kazan in March 1985, where it was handed to the university to teach students on. It had been kept flying as a laboratory for tests almost to the end, long after the airline had given up on it. For decades, it simply weathered there, the internet's favourite photograph of a supersonic jet parked behind a Russian tower block. Only recently did anyone start to care for it, and restorers gave the exterior its first proper clean in a generation. The nose that once punched through the sound barrier now points at a car park, freshly painted for the first time in 40 years. Number 7. The Bartini VVA-14, back at Monino. A few steps behind the T-4 sits something that looks less like an aeroplane than a stranded sea creature. A fat central hull, flanked by two long floats, and no wings at all. This is the VVA-14, and it first flew on the 4th of September 1972. It was the idea of Robert Bartini, an Italian-born aristocrat who fled to the Soviet Union and became one of its strangest aircraft designers. He wanted a machine that could rise vertically from the open sea, skim the waves at high speed, and hunt down the American submarines that carried Polaris nuclear missiles. It was meant to combine two of the hardest tricks in aviation at once: vertical takeoff and flight in ground effect, just above the water. For its land trials, the engineers bolted on the nose leg of one bomber and the outrigger wheels of another, a creature stitched together from spare parts. Two were built, and the one that flew made over 100 flights, around 100 hours in the air. But Bartini died in 1974, and without him, the project drifted and stopped. The surviving airframe was floated up by barge, dumped on a riverbank, half taken apart, then finally slung under a helicopter and carried to Monino, shedding pieces along the way. Today, it sits wingless and gutted, still wearing its faded red Soviet registration. The lift nozzles that were meant to punch it straight up off the water are still bolted to the hull, aimed at a sky it never learned to climb. If you've come this far, you already know where this channel is going, so subscribe, because there's a version of this list for every republic the Soviet Union left behind, and we're only now reaching the big machines. And the next one didn't rot quietly in a museum. It was built to land a battalion of Marines on any beach at 400 kilometers an hour. So keep that in mind, because from here on, the machines only get bigger. Number 6, the A-90 Orlyonok at Khimki. On the Khimki Reservoir, on the northern edge of Moscow, floating beside a small naval museum, sits something the size of an airliner, with the stance of a boat and stubby wings that obviously cannot fly. It's called the Orlyonok, the eaglet, and it's an ekranoplan, a ground effect machine. The designer, Rostislav Alexeyev, worked out that a wing flown just a few meters above flat water rides on a cushion of its own trapped air, which let this 58-meter monster carry 150 Marines or 28 tons of armor and drive them straight up onto a beach at 400 kilometers an hour. It had a turboprop at the tail and two jet engines buried in the nose, and flown low enough, radar struggled to see it, and no warship could catch it. It was the only machine anywhere that could put a full battalion of Marines, tanks and all onto an undefended beach after a 1,500-kilometer run across open water. Only 4 were ever built, one of them just a test shell. But in 1975, the first flying one broke apart during a test, traced to a fault in the hull alloy. And by 1993, the Navy had abandoned the whole concept as too strange to keep. The last one built, S-26, floats at Khimki, with its hatches open to tourists, a beach assault craft that will never see a beach. Its landing wheels are still bolted under the hull, ready to roll out of the water on an order that is never going to come. Number 5, Duga, in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. 10 kilometers from the empty city of Pripyat, down a forest road inside the zone, the trees open onto a wall of rusting steel, 150 meters tall and half a kilometer long. This is Duga, which means the Ark. An over-the-horizon radar switched on in the mid-1970s at a cost said to run into the billions of rubles. Its job was to catch an American missile launch minutes after liftoff by bouncing its signal off the upper atmosphere and back down, over the curve of the Earth, and it was the heart of a secret garrison town called Chernobyl too that housed 1,500 people and appeared on no map. When it transmitted, it leaked across the whole planet as a sharp, rhythmic tapping that jammed shortwave radio for years, and the West nicknamed it the Russian woodpecker without ever knowing what it was. The wall you can see was only half of it. The transmitter that fired the pulses stood 60 miles away near Chernihiv, and the two halves worked as one, but the antenna stood only a few kilometers from the Chernobyl reactor. When Reactor 4 exploded in 1986, the whole area was evacuated, and the radar was simply left where it stood, too big and too contaminated to bother dismantling. Inside the abandoned control building, the walls still carry hand-painted charts of foreign missiles, because in the 70s, real photographs of them were too secret to pin up. Everything left on this list is bigger than the last, and the machine waiting at number 1 is the largest thing ever built to move on its own wheels. But first, the largest thing built to move through solid ice. Number 4. The Arktika at Murmansk. In the Kola Fjord, moored a mile from the working docks, sits a black and red ship the length of 1.5 football pitches, quietly going to rust. This is the Arktika, a nuclear-powered icebreaker that entered service in 1975, driven by 2 reactors rated at over 300 megawatts between them, wrapped in a double steel hull and built to smash open a shipping lane through the Arctic ice. On the 17th of August 1977, she became the first surface ship in history to reach the North Pole, and years later, the first ship to stay at sea for more than a year without touching port. But after 33 years and more than 1 million nautical miles, she was retired in 2008, and she has been tied up at the Atomflot base ever since, waiting for engineers to work out how to take her reactors apart safely. Her older sister, the Lenin, the first nuclear surface ship ever built, was cleaned up and turned into a museum in the center of Murmansk. Arktika got no such ending. The hull that once broke a path to the top of the world sits motionless at the mole, red paint peeling, 100 meters from the newer ships that carry her name and do her job. Number 3, the second Mriya, in Kyiv. In a hangar on the western edge of Kyiv, for 30 years, sat the unfinished beginnings of the largest aeroplane ever built, a second AN-225 Mriya. The word means dream. The first one, 6 engines, 84 meters long, an 88-meter wingspan, a maximum weight of 640 tons, was designed to carry the Buran space shuttle on its back. And after the Soviet Union fell, it became the most famous cargo plane on Earth, hauling record loads no other aircraft could lift. A second airframe was started in 1989, but when the country collapsed, the work stopped, perhaps a third of the way done, and there it stayed. For decades, the plan was always to finish it one day. Then in the first days of the 2022 invasion, the only completed Mriya was destroyed on the ground at Hostomel, and every hope of a new one shifted to the unfinished twin in that Kyiv hangar. When the first Mriya was destroyed, engineers salvaged its tail, part of a wing and 2 of its engines, hoping to graft them onto this unfinished twin one day. But in April 2025, a strike set the hangar on fire, and the airframe that had waited 3 decades to be finished was very likely lost inside it. Antonov, the company that built it, says it saved what pieces it could and moved them somewhere secret, promising to rebuild once the war ends. It is a machine that spent 30 years almost finished, and may have burned before it ever turned a wheel. Number 2. The Buran at Baikonur. Remember the country that stopped existing at the start of this video? Here is the machine it was proudest of, on the steppe of Kazakhstan, inside a vast sealed hangar at Baikonur. 2 space shuttles sit in the dark under a thick coat of dust and bird droppings. The Buran, which means blizzard, was the Soviet answer to the American Shuttle, and it flew exactly once, uncrewed, on the 15th of November 1988, going twice around the planet and landing itself completely automatically in a crosswind, with no pilot aboard, something the American Shuttle never once attempted. More than 1,000 factories across the Soviet Union built parts for it, and the plan was a fleet of 5. One of the 2 shuttles in that hangar is Ptichka, the little bird, the second orbiter, 95% finished when the money ran out. The other is a full-size ground test model. The one that actually reached orbit never flew again. It sat in a neighbouring building until, on the 12th of May 2002, that roof collapsed on top of it and killed 8 workers. In a second hangar, a few hundred metres away, lies the Energia, the giant rocket built to lift the Buran into orbit, left on its test stand for more than 30 years. The survivors have sat in the unlocked hangar for 3 decades, and trespassers still creep in to photograph them. In 2021, one of them got inside and sprayed a line of graffiti across a spacecraft that has never been closer to space than the floor it stands on. That leaves one machine, the one we opened this whole list promising you. Number 1. The Mars 7907, which is located at Minsk, Belarus. Find it on a satellite map, in a lot on the edge of the Minsk wheel tractor plant, and you will see what looks like 2 enormous flatbed sections lying nose to tail in the weeds. They are not 2 separate vehicles. They are 1, 28 meters long, riding on 24 wheels, the only vehicle ever built with all 24 of them driven. On the 9th of August, 1983, the Soviet government ordered a new mobile intercontinental missile called the RT-23, known in the West as the Scalpel, a weapon that could throw 10 warheads 10,000 kilometers. The trouble was the weight. The missile alone came to over 100 tons, and the army wanted to drive it off the roads and into the forests, where no satellite could ever pin it down. The plant in Minsk was told to build something that could carry it. The first of 2 prototypes rolled out in March 1985, built as 2 6-axle halves joined by a hinge. 16 of its wheels could steer, which let a machine the length of 2 buses turn inside a circle just 27 meters wide. No ordinary engine could turn all of it, so the engineers fitted a gas turbine from the Klimov works in Leningrad, the kind used in helicopters, about 1,250 horsepower, and used it purely to make electricity for a separate electric motor built into every single wheel. It could carry 150 tons and crawl over ground that would swallow a normal lorry whole. In September 1987, the results came back, and the machine passed every test they set it. But by then, the army had decided the RT-23 would travel by rail after all, and the road version was cancelled. The 2 giants had nowhere left to go. In 1996, somebody finally found a use for one of them and hitched it up to move an 88-ton ship 250 kilometers across Belarus, from a river to a lake. It managed about 20 kilometers an hour on the good stretches, delivered the ship, then broke down and had to be towed home. After that, both were simply left near the factory that built them. On satellite photos, you can watch them sit there year after year, and one has now split into its 2 halves and is sinking slowly into the grass. They built a machine to outrun the end of the world, and then the world it was built for quietly ended without it. Go back to that airliner behind the apartment blocks in Kazan. Somebody built it to fly faster than sound, and somebody else parked it on a lawn and walked away. Every machine on this list is the same story told in a different metal. A country that could build a nuclear ship to the North Pole, a radar that tapped at the whole planet, a space plane that landed itself, and a truck with 24 driven wheels, and could not, in the end, hold on to any of them. They weren't failures. Most of them were finished, or very nearly. And then the money and the certainty ran out at the same moment, and there was no one left to switch them off. I have a soft spot for the missile truck, I'll admit. Anything that hauls a ship across a country and then breaks down on the way home has earned a bit of respect. There are more of these out there, in every republic the old empire left behind. Subscribe, and we'll go and find the next ones. Thank you.